Welcome back to our Midweek in the Word. Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about grain offerings. This morning my wife and I were doing our daily Bible reading together. It's a chapter in the Old Testament, a chapter in the New Testament, and it just so happened providentially that the New Testament passage was 2 Corinthians chapter 9, which is all about the importance of giving out of a cheerful heart for whatever the Lord might be calling us to give. And Leviticus chapter 2 is about grain offerings, these voluntary offerings that were called for by the people of Israel to give as just one more way to worship and declare their allegiance and their joy in the Lord. And in this particular passage, chapter 2 in Leviticus, it shares some thoughts that admittedly right now, pun only partially intended, are a little undercooked. So I certainly welcome your insights and your thoughts on this as well. But here's a few things that I picked up as I read this. The passage talks about different ways that grain offerings can be given. It talks about that some things that are the same, some things are different. It talks about the manner in which it's given, whether it's cooked or grilled or baked. They were all acceptable ways to give an offering. Some had frankincense on them. Oil was often involved. There were a few things that were the same, a few things that were different. The things that were different, of course, is those styles of manner of cooking. But the things that were always the same is it was always unleavened. It was always a fine flour. And the author of Leviticus makes it very clear that it's always to be given with salt. And it struck me that there were some interesting takeaways that at least were percolating in my heart, and I wonder if they're percolating in yours. The first is that this idea of the unleavened bread, obviously hearkening back to the Exodus when God's people in haste were called to leave Egypt and head to the Promised Land. And as a picture of, they didn't have time to let the bread rise, and so it was a constant reminder of that past celebration of salvation that they were given through the Lord, which for us, as we give anything, all things that we give are always done in light of the rescue and the salvation that we've been given in Jesus. And it's important that all of our gifts come out of the overflow of a heart that has been rescued, never coming with an expectation that our gifts will somehow rescue us. God's already done that through Jesus. And always with fine flour. There's the image of moving toward or giving the best of something, giving well-prepared flour. And I think that our gifts ought to be out of the overflow of the first fruits of our heart, just like all of our gifts are supposed to be first fruits, not the leftovers of my life, my energies, my resources, but the first. And then, of course, there's this language of salt, the reference to seasoning everything with salt. As one of my Old Testament professors in his commentary on Leviticus, J. Sklar, says that salt is a picture of God's covenant relationship with his people as this preserved relationship. He will always be our God, and we will always be his people. Salt is that preserving agent. It's the same, that the God's faithfulness is the preserving agent in our relationship with him. So whatever you give, and there's an incredible amount of flexibility in the giving, and there's an opportunity and a call to be somewhat unique in that giving, and yet there are some basic truths that stay there. One is that we always give in light of the rescuing work that's already been done for us on the cross. We always give out of the overflow of the first fruits of our heart and not just whatever's left over. And we always give knowing that our God has preserved us, will hold us, will sustain us, and will keep us to the very end. Anyway, those are my initial thoughts on Leviticus chapter 2 and grain offerings. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Would love for you to respond. You can leave a comment on whatever venue you're using to watch this video. But I hope that my undercooked thoughts will in some way encourage you today. Have a great week.